There is a prevalent irrational hatred of Europe. It is expressed in many ways and has manifested in a number of remarkable symptoms, including a growing hatred of whites, a deepening antipathy towards Christians and the progressive anti-right rhetoric that has arose in many places and in many groups, that share nothing in common but a neurotic fear of Europe and its culture. This hatred of Europe is so broad-based and all-encompassing, that the response to it has been disorganized and many-fronted. As we have mentioned, Christians feel they are under attack but hardly know if they need to focus on Islam, transgenderism, the far left, the new atheists, or the advocates for our replacement. Whites are similarly distracted by the multifaceted nature of the attacks. Sometimes it seems the focus is on white men, but then women are also embattled by the loss of their spaces and roles. Even though the assault seems to be directed against women, the impact can easily be seen to be directed against women of European heritage. It is our values that are under direct assault. The broadness of the assault has left us not knowing which way to face. We have often been confused as to who our allies are, if any, and which battle is paramount and which ought to be set aside until a more opportune time. We have berated ourselves and those who we see as being on our side, for the lack of action. But we are overwhelmed by the suddenness and the scale of the attack. A two-pronged war is difficult enough, but Europe is facing an almost innumerable number of fronts. Being that this war is fought on numerous nations on several continents, it ought to be surprised that a united front is difficult to establish. What response does Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, Germany, France, and many other nations do after they realize their governments are exposing them to enemy attacks? It's an experience that has no precedent, other than perhaps by the Jews, e.g. in Nazi Germany. But how does one respond when the entire political and judicial system is arrayed against you? The problem is made worse when one's greatest opponent is people who fit your profile, at least superficially. We can find differences between people on the right and the left, but these differences are not significant to other races. The white person who objects to immigration does look like a racist when his biggest critique is other white people. What policy do we use to counter members of our own race when they are allied with other races and religions? If we believe we are being attacked because we are white, because we are men, because we are Christian, and because we are conservative, when we find arrayed against us, other whites, other men, other Christians and people who claim they are conservative? But who do we focus on, non-whites, women, liberals, or those who belong to other religion? It's a messy war, and it is one in which we are not sure who the enemy is, or who our friends are. It's a conventional war fought against other nations and groups, a civil war fought against our own kind, and a race and gender war as well as a guerrilla war. The lines are so confused it is difficult to know who is fighting who and impossible to mount a solid defense, let alone a counterattack. We are being attacked in the spirit. This is seen with the virulence meted out to non-conventional allies of the right. When black women take on the persona of a white, Christian conservative siding with white males, the outrage is palatable. Democrats see it as a cosmic-level betrayal. This demonstrates it is not specifically white Christian male conservatives the left hates. Something much deeper is going on. However, the right sees the attacks on them in terms of individual characteristics. When their Christianity is attacked, they fight back as Christians. When the state floods the nation with migrants, the right speaks in terms of their race and their right to their nation. When the left attacks conservatives, the right puts on their political hat and speak in terms of policy differences between left and right. When the transgender crowd promotes their agenda along with the other far-left groups, conservatives defend the authority of males and the right of men to be men. However, we have missed the point. We understand it is the same groups who attack them on their different identities, but we do not put them all together. But defending being white, conservative, male and Christian misses the point. These are attributes or characteristics of the entity they really seek to destroy. In defending the features rather than the actual identity, we do a poor job of defending ourselves. We seem to know the left are parasites. When all the sub-issues are pushed to the side, we are left with the single issue of people who do not want to work, who do not think they ought to pay for what they get, and who are of the opinion they are entitled to more than what they get. The Bible tells us we are in a spiritual war. It's not a war of flesh and blood. But who are these spiritual powers we fight against? We can figure it out. These forces or evil are totalitarian. If they wish to exploit and oppress others, they are not actually interested in equality. The left will not and cannot expect those who they exploit to cooperate willingly. There is always force, real or implied, in what the left does. The situation is fairly simple. Power comes down to control over property. Control of people is immaterial and pointless unless it results in power over property. So, socialism is all about techniques for depriving people out of what belongs to them. Once we understand the point of contention is property, it is easy to see this as a point of divergence, and that this issue divides people into two camps. These two camps can be objectively compared and separated one from the other. It is not difficult to do. In so doing we realize that the issue is not really Europe or the white man, Christianity, or the conservative voter. The issue is the opponent of those who are parasitic and have aspirations of defrauding the property owner of his property. The only reason why whites and white men in particular, conservative Christians and Europeans in generally are vilified is because we have the property the parasites want. The hope is they can reduce our willingness to defend our property through cries of racism and colonialism. But it is not these things they are actually against. They attack these things as a diversion because if they stated outright they want what we worked for and own, they would face a more focused backlash. Not that all take the indirect path, but the ones being honest about their final objective are few and far between and never attain to the influence of those who use guile and subterfuge. What is Europe in its most fundamental sense? If one took all that Europe is and distilled it down to a single essence, what concept would encompass all that Europe was, is and will be? This essence ought to highlight something unique about Europe and its cousins, something the rest of the world wants but has not been able to be. The word that represents the essence of Europe is a concept that leaves Europe standing in stark contrast to all other places. It is a quality that has continued downstream in its daughter states. This essence that typifies Europe encompasses truth and logic and morality. Europeans are ontological, analytical, and purposeful. They believe truth is deductible and absolute. In their minds good and evil is not relative and there is an innate and incontrovertible direction to life. Europe revels in the abstract and embraces symbolism. Europe in a word is or has been more democratic. But the spirit of democracy has been eroded by the abomination of desolation, that is liberalism. Liberal democracy is not democracy or what can be called a priorian democracy. Europe has always valued those who stepped forward to do their duty. Europe had the law, but we did not rely on the law. Europe valued honor and truth. We valued the sense of commonality that made the system work. We made our systems work. Europe was quintessentially a place where fealty was expected and given. But fealty was extended not because of the law but because of the honor of those so connected. Europe had a sense of duty because we had a desire to make things work, even when the system was not fair. It was this sense to make things work, to do our duty to an ideal that held the thin red line in place. There was a deep sense of meaning to what we did because we gave what we did, meaning. Europe has history that if rife with tyranny, is inundated with stories of men driven by a vision that was greater than them. Other places attempt to mimic Europe in some of its elements, but they do not have the democratic root of Europeans. They do not have the sense of nationhood that the globalists attempt to destroy. Other nations espouse some of the principles of Europe, but they are not inherently democratic. The desire of the people is not respected the way it was in Europe at one time. The leader attempted to represent the mores of the nation. Democracy was not in the vote but in the attempt of all to represent the whole. For other nations, duty and honor are superficial. A European thinks nothing of dedicating his life to a cause because for him it represents the voice of the people. Europeans are driven by his desire to represent the commonweal, to feats of incomparable grandeur, whether in war, architecture, or science. This desire to accomplish some end, to conceptualize his people in a work of art or some other achievement, is being bled out of Europe. Europe is being dragged down into a culture where tyranny exists because tyranny is expected. Betrayal has become commonplace, because we are being taught, we cannot trust one another, that there is no common identity, only self-interest. The parasitic mindset is being grafted onto European culture, democracy is being turned into identity politics and power blocks. For in the mind of a parasite, culture is simply a product to be sold on the black market and power a resource to be traded for political benefits. The West strives to be democratic because democracy espouses the spirit of the people. This is a drive to be of one will that is expressed by the individual, the nation, and Europe as a whole. The East does not understand democracy because it does not understand the will of the people. The East looks at people as a commodity or resource. The people are a means to an end, in the mind of the East, and its leaders. So, they exploit their position and the people they are meant to represent. Europe strives to perfect itself through democracy and through being an expression of its people's will.